From being thrown into the middle of an utterly insane stunt-heavy set piece at the last minute, to having to pull off an entire movie shoot in just 48 hours. Each of the following performances were already worthy of your admiration, but the ridiculous truth behind what actually went into making them a reality only makes you appreciate them that little bit more. Gareth here from WhatCulture.com, and here are movie performances even more impressive when you know the truth. A last-minute helicopter scene keeps the cast on their toes. Ambulance. When signing up to appear in a flick helmed by the action-obsessed mind behind the likes of the Transformers franchise and Armageddon, it's safe to assume that you'll wind up being thrust into the middle of a pulsating real-life stunts-heavy sequence before your time on set is over. But in the case of Jake Gyllenhaal and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, when working on Michael Bay's Ambulance, the duo were very much under the impression they were done for the day, before arguably one of the thriller's most intense action scenes was suddenly dropped in their laps. With both stars on their way home in the titular vehicle to get their own clothes on, the balmy director radioed for the two sharps to spin around and head to the LA River. Upon showing up to the locale, Bay would reveal to his actors, "I have an idea, I have two helicopters." And before long, Gyllenhaal was hanging out the side of said ambulance as Bay improvised and entirely shot a gripping back and forth between the airborne and grounded vehicles in just 2.5 hours. Madness. The entire film was shot in just 2 days. Boiling point. For those who haven't been treated to the pressure cooker of a film that is Philip Barantini's tension-filled culinary nightmare Boiling Point, the story centers on Stephen Graham's anxious yet charming head chef Andy Jones, as he navigates one of the busiest nights of the year and a kitchen full of combustible elements, but likely adding to the on-screen pressure and stress that helps make this one of the most gripping dramas of recent times was the fact that the entire process of shooting this intense set of events was ultimately crammed into just 2 days. Originally, the plan was to try and execute 8 whole takes of the impressive single-shot tale over the course of a still ridiculous 4 days, but when the pandemic hit, the production was forced to suddenly shut down, effectively halving Barantini's scheduled shooting time for his finely choreographed masterpiece. It didn't matter though, as the director was overjoyed to discover that the third take of the film was utterly nailed. Rachel Ziegler had some rather high-profile spectators for one particular song, West Side Story. Having to step into the shoes of one of the most iconic figures in musical theater history, in a remake of one of the most adored cinematic adaptations of all time, would likely be enough to leave most humans resembling an anxious puddle in the corner of a movie set. But taking that pressure-filled scenario up a few notches in the making of Steven Spielberg's recent critically acclaimed spin on West Side Story was the fact that Rachel Ziegler had some rather high-profile front-row audience members when it came time for her to warble Maria's legendary I Feel Pretty number. In one of his 3 no doubt jaw-dropping set visits, the immortal Bruce Springsteen was present for Ziegler's live rendition of the song, with iconic composer Stephen Sondheim, who actually wrote the lyrics for the number in question, also sitting alongside Brucey for the Maria Star's performance, understandably noting how she was starstruck to the point of not being able to go over and say hello to the unmistakable icons and 2 of her all-time heroes. The whole experience was enough to make Ziegler feel insanely nervous, never mind pretty. Pedro Pascal wrecked 14 prop cars without getting injured. The unbearable weight of massive talent. Movie stunts are no joke, even when a star is only forced to take part in an action-packed exchange just a few times in order to get the sequence in the can. So you have to admire the fact that Pedro Pascal was very much game to be whacked into by a moving prop car a frankly absurd amount of times over the course of shooting one particularly hilarious stunt, found within the unbearable weight of massive talent. Perhaps even more amazingly, despite wrecking a grand total of 14 prop vehicles in the forging of this car crash of a shot, Pascal was said to have gotten through the whole ordeal without so much as a scratch on him. According to the Mandalorian star himself, when replying to a tweet revealing his 14-car wrecking exploits, he executed each and every take without messing up my hair. But I still wouldn't recommend trying this acid trip at home. Austin Butler lost touch with who he was and was rushed to hospital. Elvis. While the chance to appear in not only Baz Luhrmann's first feature film in almost a decade, but one focusing on the life of arguably the most legendary rock and roll figure of all time was clearly too tantalizing an opportunity to turn down for Austin Butler. The need to live up to this larger-than-life icon more than took a toll on the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood star. As Butler would recall to GQ, upon looking back at the sheer lengths he went to when trying to delve into the mind of the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley, you can lose touch with who you actually are, and I definitely had that when I finished Elvis. Elvis, not knowing who I was. And highlighting the frankly extreme levels of pressure he put on himself throughout his gyrating work on the project, Butler would also reveal how his body ultimately broke down the moment he finished up on the shoot, and that he was eventually diagnosed with a virus that simulates appendicitis before being bedridden for 7 days. Plastic wrap took its toll on Paul Dano, the Batman. It was evident from the minute he signed on the dotted Batman line that Paul Dano would put his heart and soul into making his Riddler a presence to remember. But the actor soon found himself paying the price for going to rather extreme lengths in order to authentically chill and disturb all who witnessed his Edward Nashton's many Zodiac Killer-inspired antics. As it eventually revealed to Entertainment Weekly, Dano struggled sleeping some nights due to this particularly intense personality being a little hard to come down from. Going further, the thorn in Robert Pattinson's Bat's side would also admit how his idea to completely wrap his head and body in plastic wrap, to highlight how the character would have gone out of his way to avoid leaving any DNA evidence behind, eventually led to his head unexpectedly throbbing due to the excessive heat being generated beneath. Luckily, the crew later landed upon the idea of popping a few holes in the makeshift mask, but Dano would still recommend skipping the cling wrap should you opt for a Riddler cosplay this Halloween. Walker Scobel's dedication to Deadpool. The Adam Project. Walker Scobel's work as a highly believable younger version of Ryan Reynolds' Adam Reed caught the attention of just about everybody in the Adam Project. This largely inexperienced performer's ability to effectively capture the essence of his older counterpart throughout was far from just a result of the youngster's undoubted ability, however. As revealed by director Sean Levy in a conversation with The Wrap, Scobel is actually very much obsessed with Deadpool, to the point where the lad had reportedly been watching the rated R flick since he was 7, and could even recite the sequel from memory. So by the time he was faced with having to replicate Reynolds' mannerisms on set, Scobel was so clued up on how the merc-with-a-mouth actor would deliver just about any line of dialogue that Levy was able to entirely trust his young star to produce improvised magic or unleash a newly forged line in precisely the way the real Ryan would without skipping a damn beat. Bradley Cooper and Rooney Mara's real-life transformations. Nightmare Alley. The reality of an unprecedented pandemic gripping the globe left many big-screen projects on ice until the world was in a safer place to continue. But instead of simply wasting that time on the sidelines, Bradley Cooper used his 6-month enforced break in the middle of production on Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley to add another dimension to his ever-present leading light of Stunt and Carlyle. With the back end of the feature largely being already in the can, Cooper decided that dropping a whopping £15 would help his character appear younger in the earlier scenes that would eventually be filmed once they got back up and running. Rooney Mara also underwent a rather drastic change during that extended absence from set, with the Molly Cahill actor falling pregnant during the initial stint of filming before eventually giving birth during the break. Then just 1 month on from bringing a child into the world, Mara epically picked right back up where she left off. Benedict Wong breaks his ribs doing his own stunts. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It turns out that wanting to very much throw yourself into the middle of the multiversal violence regularly served up in Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange sequel, as revealed by fellow Benedict during an interview talking all things Multiverse of Madness, the current Sorcerer Supreme star was actually left nursing 4 broken ribs on the back of having his body slammed into an object during a particularly gnarly stunt on the shoot. And while it wasn't clarified as to precisely which moment resulted in this nasty collection of injuries for the Ecclesbourne sensation, it does add some additional weight to the many moments you see Wong's Wong thrown around the likes of Kamartaj and Mount Wundagore at various points in the flick. The fact Wong himself hasn't even uttered a word about said broken bones either tells you all you need to know about the level of quietly tough thespian we're dealing with here too. Sylvester Stallone risked it all to be Rocky. Back in the early 1970s, Sylvester Stallone was not the same global superstar and all-round action badass we know and love today. Far from it, in fact. The struggling actor was so broke after starring in The Lords of the Flatbush that he had no choice but to sell his dog, or the poor thing would have no doubt starved in his care. However, the young thespian eventually found himself captivated by Chuck Wepner's performance against Muhammad Ali during a fight, and soon spent 3.5 days writing the screenplay for what would ultimately become Rocky. He then astoundingly refused to sell the script to producers, despite them offering him a whopping $360,000 for it, in exchange for someone else to play the starring role. In the end, the producers begrudgingly played ball with Sly, giving him the chance to play the lead. Stallone would go on to give an Academy Award-nominated performance as Rocky Balboa, all while shooting the feature on a ridiculously low budget. The movie itself himself would go on to win 3 Oscars. But it was Stallone's relentlessness in both getting the film made in the first place and then in making sure he starred as the Italian stallion that stood out as the real, genuinely impressive feat. Ed Harris is brought in late, The Truman Show. Though at this point no one could honestly imagine sitting through the Jim Carrey starring comedy drama The Truman Show without experiencing Ed Harris's compelling performance as the show's executive producer, Christoph. There was a time when another actor was set to take up this particular mantle. In fact, Dennis Hopper actually spent a whole 2 days shooting the movie before some apparent creative differences led to his immediate exit from the project. So Harris was reportedly considered for the role as he lived nearby and was available to shoot. The actor would only have a matter of days to get into the mind of Christoph, admitting that this lack of prep time actually helped in the long run, as it meant he had to rely massively on instinct. Then, after filming for just 10 days, Harris was done and dusted on the project, taking home a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for his troubles. Not bad for a last-minute substitute, right? Leonardo DiCaprio battles hypothermia. The Revenant. In order to translate the hostile environment the likes of Hugh Glass and John Fitzgerald were occupying in South Dakota towards the end of 1823 to cinema screens, the Revenant director Alejandro G. Inarritu dragged his famous stars into the fierce cold of Calgary in Alberta, Canada, and a few other treacherous locations to shoot. Throughout the feature, we see Leonardo DiCaprio's Glass put himself through hell to get revenge on Tom Hardy's Fitzgerald for killing his son. However, the star himself also had to battle through some potentially deadly scenarios in order to bring Glass to life on screen. DiCaprio has gone on record to state that 30 to 40 sequences he filmed during the shoot was some of the most difficult things he's ever had to do, with the actor getting into and out of frozen rivers, sleeping in animal carcasses, eating a raw bison liver, and constantly trying to stave off hypothermia during and in between scenes. People may dispute whether or not this should have been the performance which finally landed DiCaprio his long-awaited Academy Award for Best Actor. But you can't say he didn't earn it. Gal Gadot powers through reshoots while being pregnant. Wonder Woman. Filming intense action scenes can be physically grueling and a little bit stressful at the best of times. So imagine throwing your body into the middle of a World War I battle zone all whilst being 5 months pregnant. Sounds pretty crazy to me. Gal Gadot had already managed to make it through her shots for the impending Justice League film whilst in the early stages of her pregnancy. Yet by the time the reshoots for Wonder Woman came around, she was noticeably carrying around another little human. So the VFX team were on hand to disguise her baby bump, placing an isolated piece of green screen cloth on her stomach for the scenes, and digitally flattening her tummy in post-production. Even with that VFX wizardry though, Gadot still had to perform in some arduous sequences at a time when she must have been anything but comfortable. So there you have it, Gal Gadot is a real-life Wonder Woman. Michael J. Fox juggles 2 projects at once. Back to the Future. He may be synonymous with the role of Marty McFly today, but many moons ago, Michael J. Fox was forced to pass up on the leading role in Back to the Future due to scheduling conflicts with the sitcom Family Ties he was already starring in. So Eric Stoltz was brought in instead. However, director Robert Zemeckis and executive producer Steven Spielberg both soon sensed that Stoltz's intense approach to the character just wasn't working out. So a couple of months into shooting, Fox was switched into the lead role instead. Yet the actor would have to continue working on Family Ties whilst filming Back to the Future. This resulted in a schedule which would regularly see Fox working from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the sitcom before traveling to the movie shooting location to continue filming there. Weekends were even more grueling as Family Ties aired in front of a live studio audience, pushing Back to the Future's schedule back, meaning Fox would only finish up at around 7 a.m. Despite calling the routine exhausting, understandably so, the actor still classes the tiring workload as worth it, with those who still adore his turn in the classic today likely agreeing with him. Naomi Harris films her entire role in 3 days due to visa issues. Moonlight. As we noted in a previous entry, sometimes actors are not given very much time at all to immerse themselves in a character's world before bringing their work onto a set to shoot. However, Naomi Harris took this rushed approach to a whole new level during the making of Barry Jenkins' Moonlight. The star was having some visa issues at the time, which meant that the only way she'd be able to appear in the movie was if she dropped her promotional responsibilities for the James Bond movie Spectre and completed her work on the project within 3 days. No pressure then. On top of knowing she had to hit the ground running with the role of Paula, Harris's job was made that much harder by the fact that the crew had to shoot her scenes out of sequence. This meant she was forced to sporadically jump between different ages, and her difficult stages in her character's life, such as being deep into her crack addiction in one moment and experiencing rehab the next. Needless to say, Harris absolutely knocked it out of the park in such a ridiculously short space of time, earning herself an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Martin Sheen had a heart attack mid-shoot. Apocalypse Now. Shooting a film about the harrowing reality of war is never going to be a laid-back and breezy experience. The hell Martin Sheen went through when playing Captain Benjamin L. Willard in Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now was in a league of its own. After being brought in as Harvey Keitel's last-minute replacement, the stress of the infamously chaotic production eventually began to eat away at the actor, who was already fighting his own personal drink-related demons at the time. This all led to the moment when he suddenly suffered a legitimate heart attack and nervous breakdown midway through filming, resulting in the star being rushed to an intensive care unit. Despite this life-threatening event though, Sheen would eventually return to the set a few weeks later and finished up filming for a feature which would go on to be recognized as one of the finest movies ever made. Jim Carrey underwent CIA torture training. The Grinch. Just because you agree to appear in a family-friendly feature film doesn't mean the experience itself is going to be a joyous occasion. After being buried alive in makeup for 8.5 hours on his first day on The Grinch, Jim Carrey knew he was in for a rough old ride from there on out. In fact, the costume was so claustrophobic for the star that he outright told director Ron Howard that he would have to exit the project once that initial day of filming had concluded. So the producers brought in someone from the CIA who excelled in training agents how to withstand excruciating torture. Despite the actor himself branding the training as being quite hilarious, it undoubtedly gave him the tools he needed to power through the shoot and produce a performance that is still cherished by fans 2 decades later. But let the record show, it's not that easy being green. Laurence Olivier played Dr. Cell whilst receiving heavy treatment for cancer. Marathon Man. Coming into the making of 1976's Marathon Man, legendary thespian Sir Laurence Olivier was convinced that he didn't have much time left due to the cancer he was fighting against at that time. That was his major reason behind taking the role of Nazi war criminal Dr. Christian Cell in the first place, as the star wanted to leave behind the money made on this job to his family. His illness made working on the film an understandably difficult task, with the star undergoing treatment and taking a heavy dose of painkillers in order to get himself through the working day. However, in the end, he was able to overcome these monumental obstacles to deliver a turn which garnered much critical acclaim, and even earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Most remarkable of all though, the actor was then able to kick his cancer into remission and continue to work in the industry for the next 13 years. Now that's what you call inspiring. Every Chadwick Boseman performance after being diagnosed with colon cancer in 2016. The world was left completely stunned in August 2020 when news of the sudden death of the fiercely talented Chadwick Boseman reverberated around the globe. Yet those closest to the actor were well aware that he'd been battling against colon cancer since 2016. With that in mind, once the nature of his tragic demise was made known to the general public, fans came to appreciate his stunning work over the last few years of his life that little bit more. During that time, Boseman was able to play the first African-American Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, on the big screen, an NYPD detective in 21 Bridges, Stormin' Norman Earl in Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods, trumpeter Levy Green in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and dramatically changed the game as the Black Panther during various appearances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. To do all that whilst tackling a serious illness is nothing short of heroic, and only adds to the untouchable legacy of a talent who was unquestionably taken from us way too soon. Daniel Craig's impressive memorizing alters the shoot. Knives Out. Despite spending much of their formative years mastering the art of committing pages of dialogue to memory, when honing their craft on the stage, a great many of the thespians transitioning from stage to screen aren't often required to memorize much more than a scene or a few pages at a time due to the stop-start nature of filmmaking as a whole. But that still didn't stop former 007 himself Daniel Craig from going the extra mile during the making of Rian Johnson's 2019 smash hit Whodunit Knives Out though, as the director himself would reveal the British sensation opted to learn the entire 30-page gripping conclusion, which mostly consisted of Benoit Blanc monologuing on how he came to landing on the film's murder suspect. This insistence on being able to perform the scene like he would a soliloquy on stage resulted in Johnson being able to lean into longer takes and less cuts when producing said final stages of his ensemble epic, with the director claiming that Craig's work got better and better as each take grew in length. Keep your movie magic, all this actor needs is a license to remember. Chadwick Boseman actually learned to play the trumpet, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The late great Chadwick Boseman's staggering work over the course of his all too short time in the spotlight was already held in extremely high regard by fans and critics alike, on the back of stunning performances in the likes of Black Panther, Marshall, and Da 5 Bloods. So the eventual news of the transcendent talent bringing these works of art into existence, whilst also fighting colon cancer, only made that fierce dedication to his craft even more admirable. And if all that wasn't enough, the masterful performer also took his near unmatched commitment to another level when bringing his final piece of big screen work to the table in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. As revealed by one of Boseman's co-stars, Glyn Turman, in a conversation with Atlanta Black Star, the actor actually very much learned to play the trumpet for the part of Levy Green. And Boseman was so immersed in his need to authentically let loose this newfound skill, Turman even noted how you'd often hear the talented soul still playing once the director had called cut on a scene. The entire cast learned sign language, A Quiet Place. The second John Krasinski laid eyes on the original script for his eventual box office horror smash, A Quiet Place, the director/actor sensed that there was one element in particular he wanted to flesh out even more. The presence of a deaf character within said initial screenplay led to Krasinski further exploring what the reality of only being able to communicate through American Sign Language, due to a fear of being ripped to shreds by freakish monsters, would genuinely consist of. So as the director would later reveal to The Wrap, after bringing aboard the brilliant Millicent Simmons, an actor who was very much deaf in real life, the entire cast and crew were taught sign language for every single line of dialogue present in the script. And Simmons' contribution to the overall fright that was A Quiet Place didn't just end with her apparently being the one to teach her castmates how to successfully execute sign language either. The talented actor also acted as a trusted consultant of sorts for Krasinski throughout. Tom Hanks nearly died during shooting Castaway, gaining and later dropping a staggering 50 pounds when bringing Castaway's eventually stranded Chuck Nolan to life back in 2000. Very few would ever question Tom Hanks' commitment to the cause when it comes to signing up to appear in a dramatic slice of Oscar bait. And while the fact that he was genuinely able to drop enough weight and grow enough hair to undoubtedly convince audiences that he'd been left to fight for his survival on an island for years was already pretty darn impressive in its own right, the eventual realization of the actor very nearly dying in his pursuit of authenticity made his efforts feel that little bit more jaw-dropping and a bit shocking, to be honest. As Hanks would reveal to the BBC later down the road, the actor suffered a cut to his leg whilst filming The Tropical Nightmare. Said cut then proceeded to get infected as the shoot went on, to the point where the Academy Award-winning star was rushed to hospital, the apparent staph infection likely being deadly if left untreated. Thankfully, the infection was taken care of in the end, and the always game Hanks hopped right back on the stranded horse after filming resumed some 3 weeks later. Madness. Halle Berry genuinely got beaten up by a UFC champion, bruised. Anyone heading into the making of a film centered around any form of professional combat should likely prepare themselves for a few occupational injuries along the way. And joining that collection of suffering thespians in recent times was none other than bruised star and director Halle Berry, with the actor who was applauded for said work in front of and behind the camera getting legitimately smashed by a UFC champion during the shoot. As revealed by Berry to Jimmy Kimmel, flyweight queen Valentina Shevchenko was reluctant to let fly at the acting star early on when filming fight sequences. Then, after Berry convinced her to unleash her true power, she gave it to me and she broke 2 ribs. Determined not to slow up filming though, Berry kept her injury quiet for 3 whole days before actually going to the hospital to get checked out. Daniel Kaluuya nearly quit acting just before landing the role, Get Out. Few performances have catapulted a talent to superstardom in quite the same way Daniel Kaluuya's enthralling turn as the lead in Jordan Peele's unsettling horror Get Out did back in 2017. However, it may come as a shock to hear that the one-time skin sensation, was actually on the cusp of calling it a day with the acting industry in the lead up to landing said role in the game-changing feature. In a New Essence conversation with the director, Kaluuya would note how he'd fallen out of love with the business before meeting Peele. "I'd stopped acting for like a year and a half. I checked out because I was just like, this isn't working. I wasn't getting roles because racism and all this kind of stuff. So you reaching out was like, okay, I'm not crazy, it's proper, it's gonna be alright." To think that Kaluuya was able to put himself straight back into the frame of mind needed to execute such a complex and impressive performance after taking an 18-month break away from performing only makes his eventual display as Chris Washington that little bit more remarkable. Scarlett Johansson was pregnant during stunt shots, Avengers Age of Ultron. Pulling off highly athletic stunt sequences in the thick of bringing a slice of blockbuster action into existence, pretty darn tasking at the best of times. Now take said always arduous endeavor and add the reality of carrying around another little human in your belly. Well, that's precisely the reality Black Widow star Scarlett Johansson found herself in when appearing in 2014's Avengers Age of Ultron, with the superwoman and soon-to-be mother choosing to still throw herself into the chaos, despite being very much 5 to 7 months pregnant. It must be said that Marvel were all too happy to call in the help of a number of stunt doubles for certain stunts deemed too dangerous for the actor with a baby on board to be genuinely at the center of. But Johansson still did as much as she could do, and even managed to pull off certain motorcycle exchanges with a little help from a mechanical bull-type motorcycle and a whole load of CGI. Dave Bautista and Tig Notaro never met. Army of the Dead. One of the single most charming aspects of Zack Snyder's zombie-stuffed Netflix blockbuster by the name of Army of the Dead undoubtedly comes in the form of Tig Notaro's no-nonsense pilot Marianne Peters. However, the actor's appearance in the zombie heist adventure was only made official rather late in the day, thanks to the originally cast Chris D'Elia's sexual misconduct allegations, provoking a change-up in August 2020, 1 year on from the film initially wrapping. So throwing herself straight into the part, Notaro wound up shooting her entire role in the flick in just 14 days against a green screen, with mostly only an acting partner feeding her the lines needed to make a scene work. Yet this bizarre process of cutting her into the feature meant that, despite sharing scenes together in the flick, Notaro and the film star Dave Bautista never actually met, and hadn't by the time the film landed on our screens. The lack of FaceTime did little to affect the pair's chemistry mind, with the former WWE star himself noting, "Anybody who doesn't know that that's the case won't pick up on it at all." Christian Bale had no clue about the MCU, Thor: Love and Thunder. Upon being approached about the prospect of appearing in Taika Waititi's Thor: Love and Thunder tale as Gore the God Butcher, Christian Bale has confirmed he had next to no clue what the MCU even was. Going further, Bale would also later reveal how he'd only ever seen Ragnarok and Infinity War or Endgame, with his hilarious description of the latter being there was a big bloke looking for stones. And Bale was also unaware that he'd be required to dive into the world of prosthetics for the shoot, later admitting, "I actually arrived thinking we were doing CGI, and that I would have to stick on a few dots." Whatever way you slice it though, the British former Batman's apparent lack of awareness of his MCU surroundings, or what would actually go into physically creating his gore, had little impact on his eventual show-stealing turn in the divisive slice of Marvel cinematic fun. Michael Douglas was pulling double duty, Wall Street and Fatal Attraction. Making your presence known in just one feature capable of making those in charge of handing out gongs come award season sit up and take notice is something many actors go their entire careers without successfully achieving. So the fact Michael Douglas was able to pull off this feat back in 1988 twice on the back of appearing in both Fatal Attraction and Wall Street the year prior was already an achievement in itself. The fact the eventual Oscar winner was able to breathe life into both Dan Gallagher and Gordon Gekko at practically the same time though is something that still has to be seen to be believed. Douglas doing everything in his power to avoid a scheduling conflict getting in the way of sharing the screen with both Charlie Sheen and Glenn Close in the stockbroker drama and psychological thriller respectively, the actor insisted on alternating between the two flicks from week to week. The end results speak for themselves, with Douglas coming away with the Academy Award for Best Actor for Wall Street and picking up a BAFTA nomination for his turn in Fatal Attraction.